Welcome to the Dino Watch Podcast, a show helping you to separate the facts from the fiction as we look at incident reports from the world and break down where dinosaurs have been sighted in the wild. In episode 3, a member of the Californian Highway Patrol has come forward to give an exclusive interview about the aftermath of a dinosaur encounter which took place in the fall of 2019. Since the dinosaurs were first released into the wild in 2018, we have read many stories online of animal encounters in the wild. Indeed, there was the well-documented case of a Gallimimus flock stopping the Vice President's convoy on a visit to the very same area back in the spring of the same year. Whilst chance encounters like those have proven to bring disruption but have generally been nothing more, the encounter which we are talking about today is quite the opposite. The officer, whose name we won't disclose in this episode due to their active service, was asked to respond to an incident where a vehicle was forced off of the road when a Stegosaurus charged up an embankment and onto a busy freeway. For the person involved in the incident, life-changing injuries have had a continued impact on their life, but the Stegosaurus continues to roam free in the wild. Strap yourselves in for this one, as it could be a tense episode. Thank you for agreeing to join us, officer. I know you're uncomfortable about doing this, so we'll keep your voice hidden for the purpose of the show. Firstly, can you describe to us how the call-out in question came over the radio in the fall of 2019?
Yeah, of course, not a problem, Tom. These stories need to be heard, in my opinion. Now, as you said, it was a fall night, September 23rd, if I'm not mistaken. A little background on my beat. I patrol wine country, which means hills, long stretches of road, and no lights. This time of year, we've got a lot of tourists up here for the harvest. They're doing tastings, and a lot of them are driving when they shouldn't. So when the car over is an 1180 with a hit and split, I expected an automobile accident with someone fleeing the scene. I couldn't have been more wrong.
Yeah, I mean... Wow. So working in highway patrol, like you've alluded to there, I can really imagine that you've attended a lot of incidents like this, with really similar consequences. So how exactly was this one different?
Well, it did turn out that this was a first, but you're right. At the time, it seemed fairly routine. As I mentioned previously, no lights on a lot of our roads up here. So when I first arrived on scene, I wasn't able to take in much of my surroundings outside of the wreckage. I was immediately struck by the damage to the car. One headlight pointed straight into the air, the other was non-existent, and the engine compartment looked like it had been hit by a wrecking ball.
Wow.
Yeah, it was bad. My first check was the victim. It was a male driver. He was unconscious but alive, apparently not by the airbag. He was a lucky guy. Whatever hit him avoided the passenger compartment. I sent out a call for lights and sirens to get this guy checked out, and then I went about analyzing the scene.
Okay.
Yeah, well, to put a little more context to this, again, I was called out for a normal automobile accident. I had no idea what I was really walking into.
I mean, I can imagine there's not exactly a call out for a dinosaur incident, is there?
Yeah, we didn't have it on the books yet. But yeah, so not yet knowing what caused this, my first question was, where did the other vehicle go? Wrecked this bad, the other car shouldn't have just driven away, but there were no signs of any other cars on the scene.
Okay.
And I started spotting different clues. First was a complete lack of paint transfer, which usually occurs when two vehicles collide. Second was a small amount of reddish material on the fenders, which I determined to possibly be blood. And finally, a large stake-like object sticking out of the hood. I didn't really have any other context for it. It was a large... It could have been a bone, it could have been a piece of... It was dark, I couldn't really tell. So I found these objects, and that led me to believe that some sort of injury occurred during this crash that was different from what happened to the victim in the car, because he wasn't bleeding. So I started to search the scene, and I actually stumbled across a small trail of blood on the asphalt. I decided to follow it off the roadway into the vineyard, which runs parallel to many of our highways up
Yeah.
here. I readied my torch and I headed off in the field. The trail was easy enough to follow. Whatever I was following moved through the grapevines like they weren't even there. It tore them out by the roots and it moved away from the road. I was expecting to find a drunk college kid, injured on an ATV at this point,
Yeah.
but that's when I started hearing a noise. It was tough to place at first. I guess it sounded like the mooing of a cow.
Okay.
And that got me thinking that this call was turning into a cattle catcher. Livestock do end up on the roads up here, and it usually ends up poorly for the animal and the car. So with that in mind, I readied my service pistol and I made for the noise. I could see silhouettes of what I thought were the vineyard's work trucks parked in a cluster ahead of me. The forms didn't quite make sense, but they were way too big to be cows, so I think all my brain could associate them with was heavy equipment.
Yeah.
But as I got closer, it was apparent that these forms were breathing. Some even seemed to be snoring. At least that's what I realized later. Before I go further, I'd like to address something. I guess this would be useful for your listeners. I've never
Sure.
really visited Jurassic World.
Okay.
I've seen the ads on TV plenty, and I've had friends who have posted about their trips there.
Yeah.
But up until this exact moment in my life, I had never met a dinosaur.
Okay.
And let me just say, pictures and diagrams don't do them justice. These
No.
things were huge. And at night in a field with nothing around you, they were kind of scary too.
I can imagine.
I know a lot more about them now, but at that time, all I'm seeing is spikes and armored plating, and I'm afraid for my life.
Yeah.
Luckily, the majority of the herd was asleep at this point, but one of them was restless. It was laying on its side and moaning. I I clocked that it must be injured, and thought that more than likely it was involved in the wreck on the road. Having determined this, I decided I should get back to the car and radio this in. There wasn't much more I could do on my
Yeah.
own, aside of potentially being injured myself. So I backed out, and as I was, the stego, which I came to find out that was the Stegosaurus, the name of this dinosaur,
Yeah.
the one injured, it flicked its tail up, and as it did, I noticed that it was missing one of the large spikes that it had on the end of its tail. I didn't immediately associate this, but later came to realize that was the stake that I had initially seen embedded in the hood of.
Yeah.
I guess, Tom, do you have any more questions about how that all played out?
It's interesting. So something that was commented on a lot online about this in the wake of this incident was the fact that the Stegosaurus itself didn't attack the car, but rather caused this incident by accident. So I was interested if that was true, because obviously that's good in one way because it means that these animals aren't attacking us at least. But it's also terrifying that something this chaotic could happen in an accident as well.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I think this story we're sharing, because that's entirely true. It took us a bit of work to piece that together. At first we thought that it was an unprovoked just attack on this car, but through some police work and detective work, we were able to kind of piece together what happened at the scene, and it was honestly a little more amusing than alarming.
Yeah.
So not far off the road at this vineyard, this owner was aging their wine in a small shed. And from what we could gather, this herd of stegosaurs must have been thirsty because the shed was ransacked. Those tiny-headed mischief makers broke open all those casks and they drank their fill.
Wow.
Our best guess was after that we had a bunch of massive armored cows, drunk and wandering the streets eating grapes. I hear the laughter, and I agree it does sound pretty funny.
Yeah.
That it was, and more than likely that's why our victim pulled over to film these stegosaurs milling about in this field, probably bumping into one another, and yes, eating grapes off of grapevines. Um, we know this now because after the victim was removed from the vehicle, we found his phone, and on that
Okay.
we had all the evidence we needed to fill in the gaps. So the stegosaur, when it first shows up in the video, is stumbling and uneasy on its feet. The the driver at this point, I think, is a better term for him than victim because, as it turns out, he was involved, at least, in the outcome of what happened. We didn't
Okay.
until viewing of this video, and it's worth mentioning. So the driver pulled up to these animals as they were grazing in the field, and he began to jeer at them, yell, taunt them, try to get them to acknowledge him in
Yeah.
a cool shot. And they were pretty much entirely unfazed. Again, in a way, I don't know if dinosaurs, if we can say they get drunk, but they were inebriated, or at least in their entire wherewithal. So
Yeah.
one of them decided they were done with this side of the vineyard and they wanted to cross the expressway and go on to the next orchard or vineyard. And as it crossed over and in front of the driver's car and decided to lay down because it must have become tired. This annoyed the driver because, one, it wasn't paying attention to him, it wasn't doing anything that he really wanted it to do,
Yeah.
and how it was blocking his path. So he made a mistake. He began to honk and flash his lights. The stego, as an animal, took this as an act of aggression.
Yeah.
And it was on its feet in a flash, despite being intoxicated. It was rearing up and snorting at his car. He was getting cool shots now. He was happy about it. And that's when he decided to press his luck by laying on the horn one final time.
What an idiot.
Yeah. Poor decisions. The dinosaur looked up and down his car one last time, and with the flick of its tail, turned it into the metal road art we were examining on the side of the road.
Yeah.
The victim was knocked out by the airbag deploying and his phone fell on the dash. It got a clear shot of the stego letting out a long belch, actually, before it stumbled back off into the vineyard. Obviously we feel for the victim and his injuries. He did make poor decisions in his actions, but he also was put into a tough situation by having these creatures on the loose to begin with.
Yeah.
Had we not received this video, more than likely the stegos would have had to have been relocated somewhere else. As it stands, knowing what actually did transpire, they've been allowed to continue roaming free up here.
Okay.
With the caveat that now all the local grape farmers have been informed to keep their wine stores locked up tight.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So obviously you're saying there that the dinosaurs are still with you. or at least they're still in the local area. So that kind of leads quite nicely into the next question I wanted to ask you, which is speaking more broadly, so away from this incident, how much of your time would you say is getting eaten up by incidents involving dinosaurs? Would you say it's a large amount?
In recent months, it's getting to the point that I might say it's a large amount. Things are definitely escalating.
Yeah.
Uh, the dinosaurs seem to have found a way to multiply faster than anyone had predicted. Um, it was months between the initial outbreak and my first encounter with that stego. In the preceding 3 years, I've been on over 20 calls involving dinosaurs.
Okay.
I'm still not the best at pronouncing all their names, but calls have involved, from what I understand, compies. And
Yeah.
all I say about those is they're evil little things. Gal- Gallimimus.
Yep.
They tend to be gentle, but they're really fast. Um, the Pseudoceratops and Allosaurus encounter that we've all heard about at this point
Yeah.
at Big Rock. I was one of
We're
the.
actually going to be talking to somebody who was there in a few weeks' time as well.
Oh, no way. Well, you'll have to tell them send them my regards.
I will do.
Um, and then of course, I do have another, pretty exciting story involving the one dinosaur whose name we all do know, the T-Rex.
Yeah.
We could save that maybe a different time.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. It's a good reason to get you back on the show. So with this incident and obviously some of the other incidents that you've alluded to as well, a big thing that we're seeing and the reason why you're on this show in the way you are with your voice disguised, is the fact that the US Fish and Wildlife Service are trying to cover up these incidents and the other incidents like them. They're not telling us the truth. So I wanted to ask you, do you think that's to stop fear spreading at this point, or do you think there's something more sinister going on?
Even with the voice being disguised here, I am a little uncomfortable with this question. I'll go a little bit into it, but to start, I will say many officers, myself included, wish we could have been more transparent from the start of the outbreak.
Yeah.
We feel it would have saved some lives. Um, at this point, there's no putting them back in the box. They're out there, and there's with the years between the initial escape and now the actual dispersion of these creatures throughout, the countryside,
Yeah.
become clear that people needed to know from the get-go because they just started showing up in farmers' fields, as we discussed, on roadways, and that was when people knew they were out there, and that just doesn't
Yeah.
the right way to have gone about it. Not that I know a better way. Um, I wish I had the right answer, and I'm sure they do as well. It seems that nobody had planned for this, and we're doing our best to try to pick up the pieces, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You alluded to it there a little bit, but I wanted to ask, what do your colleagues think about the way everything's being handled? Is there a similar kind of sentiment in the police force more broadly?
Yeah, I think all around the consensus is we were too slow to start. Um, but with anything involving government, it took time to get the necessary agencies in place to start turning the tide on these things. And,
Yeah.
as I mentioned at the top, I do think we're starting to potentially get a handle on these things. They're doing a lot more training within the departments. I do know some of these dinosaur names now because of classes and things that they are starting to offer to areas where officers are more likely to encounter the creatures.
Yeah.
And that does help because had I known that night of back in 2019, I would have known that the Stegosaurus generally is a peaceful animal. But just by the look of it, being uninformed, I was afraid of it. And
Yeah.
that's part of this, just teaching people that not all dinosaurs are scary, and even the ones that potentially could be are still just animals like, anything else you might encounter in the wild.
Yeah. No, that's a good attitude to have, and I think it's definitely an important one to take forward with us. What would you do differently to deal with the situation we're going through currently?
That's a tough question, because I'm all for protecting them. I'm of the mind that they didn't ask to, be here. It was a company that created these animals, and now that they're here, it is kind of all of our collective responsibility to make sure that they, thrive to the best of their ability.
Yeah.
If I was to give some guidance, I think I would suggest that they be relocated.
Okay.
And potentially relocated somewhere off of the continental, United
Yeah.
States, more towards like an island.
But
And
then surely you're going in a circle, aren't you? Because that's where they came from.
you're correct, exactly. And I think that that would be the metaphorical box that we need to put these dinosaurs back into.
Yeah.
And I say that because when I was younger, the San Diego incident was all people talked about.
Yeah.
It was the first time a dinosaur had ever been seen. It's rampaging around a major city. You might say it was news. And I mention this because shortly after that, the creature's creator, John, what was his name?
Hammond.
Hammond, thank you,
Yeah.
had captured and relocated that Rex to what he said was a biological preserve that was somewhere off the coast of Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Oh, from all reports, it was a different island than the one with the dinosaurs on it that eventually became Jurassic World. And I know I question, and I'm sure more people out there question, why they don't try to bring the dinosaurs there. I know
Yeah.
that Dino destroyed Jurassic World, which that island, Tom, what was the name of it?
That was Isla Nublar.
Okay. So I know that that obviously is off the table, but there has to be sufficient space somewhere out there that these animals could live in a natural-ish environment or habitat and, live out their lives in peace while also not endangering, all of the people that we're out here trying to protect.
Yeah. I think there's a really interesting conversation that we could have there. And sadly, we don't have time for it today. But obviously, something that we are seeing quite prominently is a prevalence in poaching. Sadly, since these animals return to the mainland as well. So I do question whether an island would ever truly solve the situation, or whether all the time it's somewhere that we can access, there's still going to be people going there and causing chaos. But like I say, that's a conversation for a different show. To round this one out, I really wanted to ask you, what do you think is going to happen if we don't find a solution? Do you get the feeling that things are likely to get worse?
I do believe we're getting close to a tipping point. I think we still have time to come back from that. But if the dinosaurs continue breeding at the rate they seem to be, I feel that our ecosystem in North America is in for a big surprise. At
Yeah.
this point, attacks directed at humans are limited. They happen, but they're few and far between.
Yeah.
Can only speculate that this is due to an abundance of wild game. But as that depletes, I'm worried about what comes next. So until the DSW sorts this mess out, I urge people to be vigilant, avoid the woods, and definitely stay out of any long grass or vegetation. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you letting me get this story out there, Tom, and I hope we could talk, sometime again in the future.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for coming on the show.
Yes, of course. Again, thank you for having me.
It's safe to say that encounters with dinosaurs can have deadly consequences, so we are glad that things didn't get to that extreme in this instance, even if the encounter which the officer describes does seem to have been just as damaging for the people involved. It's safe to say that the prevalence of prehistoric animals in our lives is having an impact on everything, including some of the biggest moments which we may have traditionally taken for granted. Join us next week as we talk to a bride whose big day was spoiled when a pteranodon swooped down from above and terrified her guests. We're not quite sure that the old proverb, something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue, accounts for prehistoric life, but we'll find out soon. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe wherever you listen. Together, we can learn how to survive with dinosaurs in the wild.